Hi, guys. So my name is Laura Husking. I'm the Director of Marketing for Generations Counseling and Care Management. We're a geriatric care management firm that's been providing care management, advocacy, and psychotherapy services in New York and New Jersey for over 30 years. But we also have a real passion for community education for fellow professionals and caregivers alike. So the topic today is difficult conversations, and that's probably one of the most important topics we can actually address. And I know this firsthand because when my mom was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, she was pretty young, and none of us had had any conversations with her about life care planning from a legal and care perspective. And I can tell you for certain that you never want to be making decisions while being in crisis mode. You constantly are second guessing those decisions. While if you have a plan in place, it makes it a lot much less stressful and you don't spend as much time second guessing your own decisions. Now, I was very lucky. My family was all on the same page. But as we all know, families are very different. Everybody has different dynamics. So it takes different kinds of approaches to talk about life care planning. So before I introduce the speakers, I just want to let people know again to put their questions in the chat box. I'm going to let both of them talk first because I don't want to be interrupting them. But once they're done, I promise you, I will be looking at the chat box and asking them questions. Again, if you do not feel comfortable sending the chat to everyone, you can personally message me on the chat box and I will ask the question anonymously. All right, so it is time to get to our illustrious speakers. I'm very excited. So I'll tell you a little bit about them before we get into the program. So we have Laurie Hauptman here, and Laurie Hauptman has spent her entire career educating the masses about long-term care, the long-term care journey, and the importance of planning for the unexpected. Laurie's experience is essential to her role handling the firm's court work, including guardianships, conservatorships, and special needs trusts. Laurie and Yale, who's her husband and law partner, have personally navigated and helped thousands of families through the complicated and emotional estate and long-term care planning process. So our other panelist here, I'm very excited, maybe not too biased because I work with her, but for over 20 years, Stacey Maines has been using her passion for advocacy and facilitating communications with families, along with her strong clinical training, to focus on the needs of our seniors and their families. She's pretty much worked in all terms of long-term care, including skilled nursing, assisted living, continuing care communities, hospice, and home care. She's served in several management positions in social services and marketing, as well as the executive director of an assisted living after receiving her CALA in 2012. So throughout her career, she's done a lot of educational programs. So I'm very excited that she's our director of care management services. Thank you guys so much. So I'm going to get started by letting Laurie speak first. So Laurie, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's actually a beautiful sunny day. No snow today. I feel like the last few days we've been living in like a snow globe where it just shakes it up and we're snowing. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm only going to talk for about 10 minutes. And just to give you a little bit of an overview, but I appreciate Generations for having me on, and I'm happy to be partnering with Stacey. I believe our message has synergy. So we're going to see if you maybe learn something you didn't know. But really what it comes, what we're sort of the message that we're putting out there is that long-term care expenses or illnesses or anything that will require care is really unpredictable. And strokes, aneurysms, early onset dementia, and now COVID can come at any age. And I really feel that with having the pandemic happen the last year, that people are now really understanding the unpredictability of life. We've been interviewed several times, one recently by the news, and they have asked me if my message has changed in long-term care planning or estate planning since COVID. And I said, no, my message has not changed. I think it's just being received better because we've seen a big uptick in estate planning documents. And we've always had the crisis planning, but at least more in being proactive. So that's just a little bit of an interesting sort of observation. And I think it's because you never really thought about ventilators, and then you couldn't turn on the news without hearing about ventilators. And so we know about ventilators. We know about how much they cost, by the way, to be in a ventilator facility. For some of you that don't know, there are very few facilities that can take care of someone on a ventilator. And we have 2 clients on ventilators now, not COVID related, were for other conditions. And one is getting, the cost is $30,000 a month. And the other one is $60,000 a month. So for all of you that you can realize that you could certainly exhaust someone's entire life savings so quickly without planning. So really what I want to emphasize today is that you need properly drafted, notice the word properly drafted, and comprehensive documents so that you have financial and medical decision makers in place. And if you don't have them, the documents at all, and you need someone to make decisions for you, you're going to have to then resort to guardianship, which is a court intervention process. And unfortunately, even though you're dealing with family members who will be appointed as your guardian, you're going to have reporting requirements, and you're going to have oversight requirements. You're going to have to get approval for selling real estate of the person. And it just makes for legal interventions, which could be avoided if you had a proper document in place. Make sure that they are done, these documents, by attorneys that understand your needs. Don't just go to any lawyer. This is not the time to take, the recommendation from someone and say that, their kid is just starting their practice. Can you do it? Every lawyer I know will probably have some sort of power of attorney on their computer. The difference though is if they don't utilize it every day, they don't see how it's used, it's not going to likely be comprehensive to cover long-term care planning and asset protection planning and have all the powers in it. So again, it's not the time that when your divorce attorney says, I'll just do your power of attorney, because you don't necessarily want your spouse to now be making medical decision-making for you or advanced life measure decision-making. Don't take them up on it, even if it's free. They may not have the right documents, language. So, and that also brings us to a big sort of misconception, which is what is an elder law attorney versus an estate planning attorney? We happen to be both. Almost all elder law attorneys are estate planning attorneys, but not all estate planning attorneys are elder law attorneys. And the way you can sort of vet that is by making sure that the estate planning attorney who says that they are an elder law attorney, make sure they do Medicaid applications, make sure they understand and do VA benefit applications. Most attorneys that want to kind of consider themselves in this area of law will put that elder law moniker on their website, but that could mean that they're dabbling in it and not really truly elder law attorneys. So you really want to ask them, what do they really do in that realm? So then the next sort of message I want to get out to you is plan. You have to plan. It's really the most important word I can give you. Yes, you can have a crisis situation where you haven't planned, but if you plan, it makes that crisis situation so much more easy to deal with, and you have more choices. So planning preserves assets and money gives you choices. And so I always tell everybody, you want to be proactive. I think Stacey and I were talking about all our little messages that we give. You want to be proactive instead of reactive. You want to prepare instead of repair. I mean, we have all these little sayings, but the idea is that people are living longer and they're running out of their money, okay? Because years ago, when they instituted 65 for Medicare, the life expectancy was like 62. And now the life expectancy is into your 80s, and we're seeing many people in their 90s. My dad is 89, he's still on the golf course, still going back and forth from Florida, and he's still very vibrant. So we're seeing a lot, but here's the problem. People in their 90s retired when they were in their 60s with a finite amount of money. And unless they won the lottery or the Powerball, they have to take that money and get them to 30 years later, when initially the concept was they would only be living another 10 years, And so that's the problem, what we're seeing. So hiring a care manager, like, Generations, or having aides in the home, or moving to an assisted living, and again, some of you are industry people, costs money. And money gives you the options. So our goal is for people to have choices, so they can tap into the industry resources that are available. And that's what I always say. There's so many options available to hire a healthcare advocate, a care manager through Generations, and do these things, but you do have to have funds. It's wonderful to have a private aide in an assisted living, but you have to have funds. It's wonderful to want to have a private room if your facility allows it, even if you're on Medicaid, but you would need to have gone to someone like me for planning, so that there's a trust to tap into for that. So money gives you options. Medicaid has a 5-year look back. Please understand that most facilities have a private pay requirement. Please don't confuse that. For those of you that are in facilities that work for them, you appreciate that what I'm saying is that I could have a client that moved their money out of their name 5, 6, 7 years ago, but they will then decide they want to go to a lovely place that requires private pay. And I have to explain to them that even though they're financially past the Medicaid look back of 5 years, so whatever's in their name is not considered an asset for the $2,000 eligibility, or a married couple, $130,000 roughly with the community spouse. It doesn't satisfy the private pay requirement for that facility. Okay, so that's very important. Long-term care insurance, for those of you that are in the industry, or obviously take that. And by the way, care management can be paid for by most long-term care insurance policies. They have it built in, or I should say a lot of the policies have it. I should say most, a lot of them do. So it's important that your clients or your residents can pull out those policies, see if they have a care management clause in it, and then obviously that could give you the ability to hire Generations with that. The long-term care insurance is a piece of the puzzle. It's not the answer. I always tell people, most of my clients don't have the Rolls Royce of policies now, which are lifetime policies that paid, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 plus their income. And we are regularly seeing now people exhaust their long-term care insurance policies while they're in assisted livings or have aides at home. And now they do need to tap into Medicaid. That is why trust planning or elder law or asset protection planning still plays a role, even though you have long-term care insurance, because one is not the complete answer to the other. It's not one or the other. Just for some of you that don't know, there are two kinds of sort of long-term care insurance that we know about and that we work with. That's the traditional kind, where you pay a premium, and if you don't use it, you lose it. They have a lot of underwriting requirements. Often, if you're in your later ages already, you're not going to necessarily get it. Or if you have some illnesses or disabilities, you may not pass underwriting. But there are now newer options available. They're called asset-based or life insurance or annuity-based policies that can give you long-term care insurance. They're hybrid, and they're an amazing there are amazing products out there that can help you pay for long-term care. And the beauty of those, they have less underwriting, if at all any, and they also are not a use it or lose it, because if you don't use it for long-term care, you often have a beneficiary designation and it could still go to your loved ones. So I sort of want to impart to all of you that that is something to explore. Again, it's a piece of the puzzle. Trust, please understand that all trusts are not created equally. Many of my Floridians have what are called revocable trusts. They go to Florida and they set up, or they were in Florida. Florida is really big on revocable trusts because they want to avoid probate, having to go through the probate system of administering your estate upon your death. The issue, though, is New Jersey is probate friendly. We don't have some of the obstacles, but they get all excited to tell me when they come to New Jersey and their loved one has a diagnosis of Parkinson's or ALS or had a stroke, that they had moved their money into a trust 7 or 8 years ago, and they're happy to tell me that now when they want to hire me to do the Medicaid application, they're good to go. None of those assets in the trust are, they can't be looked at by our countable assets. And unfortunately, I have to convey to them that that revocable trust was not an asset protection planning trust. They now need to move it into the kind of trust that I would be preparing. I mean, I do revocable trusts also here, but they have to go into a irrevocable trust or a Medicaid eligibility trust and start the clock over. So that's not usually a popular conversation. So I just want to explain to all of you, those are just a little bit of food for thought that, and to me, anyone that's in the industry, guys, you will look like a rock star if you just can impart some of this information to your clients or your residents, because sometimes that first fall or that first diagnosis is the window to make this planning happen. And you could end up really making a huge difference financially to your clients if you tell them to act and speak to an elder law attorney. It's really honestly, I can't explain that, and emphasize that enough. We work on a free consultation. I can only tell you for ourselves, we never charge. So we're happy to be a part of that as a liaison for any of you. They call our office, they'll speak to my intake paralegal, Jill, who just takes down some preliminary information so that when they have a consultation with either me or my husband, Yale, we can hit the ground running with legal recommendations. I always find that that's the best way, because I can't give you advice in a vacuum without knowing basic information. We don't ask for account numbers. I don't need social security numbers for that part. It's simply so I have an idea of what's going on with you. It works beautifully. So, and a lot of my planning is done other than guardianships on a flat fee, which is also a little bit interesting. Most lawyers charge hourly and we work on a flat fee, which tends to take out that worry of all the phone calls and the emails and the guidance, because most people, that hourly rate becomes a barrier for using or seeking legal intervention. And we took away that a long time ago because we wanted to, if you don't call us and you don't ask us, we can't avoid some of the pitfalls, and then you may not become Medicaid eligible when that's what we wanted you to do and get. So I'm going to leave it and pass it off to my friend next to me. I feel like it's the Brady Bunch, Stacey, who's right next to me on the page. And then we'll open ourselves up for questions afterwards. So thank you, Laura and Stacey, and I pass the baton to you.
But baton, if we were more savvy, I keep on Zoom kind of doing that thing where it actually looks like we're passing something.
Yeah.
But fine, baton tossed. So thank you so much, Laurie. And I think that was a great, and Laurie and I have had several conversations like this, and that's how this was kind of born. Like, well, why don't we just bring our conversation out there, because we are on the same page with this idea about planning. And obviously we're coming at it from two different parts. So you've all heard about Laurie and the documents that she talks about, and the importance of this planning and the importance of having these documents. So I know you're all excited to go out and create them and have them and make sure that your clients have them, because she did an amazing job selling you on the importance of having these documents and having these conversations with an elder law attorney, with somebody, with the professionals to talk through this planning and estate planning and long-term care planning and healthcare planning, because things will come up. So now, and there's one thing that you said in there, which was so interesting, because it was like a perfect baton toss to me of, this isn't a popular conversation to have, right? Everything that Laurie's talking about is a life event. And like, if you think about any other life event that we have, we talk about them throughout our life, right? I gave the example the other day of, I have a vivid memory of being in second grade and everyone going around the classroom, what do you want to be when you grow up? And career day at school, and talking about these things. And then, my second one is going through the college planning process now. And we had a very lovely, painful, beautiful conversation, awkward conversation with the college guidance counselor, which is only painful and awkward because it entails a 17-year-old girl talking about herself for an hour. But you have it because you need to go through those things. And this isn't the first conversation we've had about college. So why is this any different? Why is this life event? Like we talk about buying our first house, we talk about our wedding, we talk about having babies and meeting our partners and what we want to do when we grow up and all of these things. Why don't we talk about aging? Why don't we talk about what's going to happen if we get sick? Why can't we be more comfortable talking about this life event? Because it's just as important. So the documents that Laurie talked about are important to have, but if you don't have the conversations around them, they're not as meaningful. They're not as going to be as helpful to you when you need them. For example, I have clients who have said, oh yes, no, great, I finally, and actually forget it, not clients, my parents. When my parents finally, after 10 years of me working in long-term care, went out and they got a long-term care policy and they wrote their advance directives and they were so proud and excited to tell me that they finally wrote their they had the living wills, they had their advance directives. And I said, great, well, where are they? Well, they're in the filing cabinet. We're not going to talk about that right now. And I said, well, we need to talk about that. It's not just having them. No, I don't want to talk about it right now. That doesn't matter. It's for later. We don't need to talk about it. Next, move on. And that's my parents that have heard me talking about this for years. So while it's great that they had the conversation with their attorney and that they created these documents, it's equally important for them to talk to us about what's in them. It took them 5 years to tell me, and it was a whisper conversation. They didn't want my older sister to hear that they had named me as a proxy, because in addition to getting the front seat for the rest of her life, my sister is the firstborn. There's a certain rite of passage of the firstborn, but apparently she got bumped and I'm the healthcare proxy. So, but that was said in a whisper conversation. So why a whisper? Why does this have to be these taboo conversations? So I think it's my ultimate goal would be for everyone to be more comfortable talking about aging, talking about what is going to happen when they age, what their care needs, what they want that to look like for them, to talk about these things so that when they happen, and God willing, we all age, right? We want to sort of get to the point that we're living a life and things are going to be changing and we've reached a different point in our life. In the same way we plan for every other life event, including retirement. And I think Laurie brought up a good point that retirement is no longer, I retire at 65 and I travel for a few years and then get sick and die. Retirement is now, hopefully you're retired and living for 30, 40 years. So I think it's important to be having these conversations and thinking about what this means. So hopefully, ultimately, it would be great if we can work these words and these topics into more of an everyday conversation and make it more comfortable to be talking about it in an everyday way so that when it happens, it's not the talk. It's not that we need to sit down and talk and all of a sudden you're pulling out these documents that nobody wants to have talked about. If you integrate it more into your everyday conversations, and if you make it more comfortable and if you sort of start being more comfortable saying those words, it doesn't become this punitive conversation that you're having. And I'm going to put the professionals on the spot for a moment, because I think as professionals, it's equally our role, if not more so. And I think sometimes we're just as guilty as creating these taboo topics. And I'll give the example of when I worked in assisted livings and in continuing care. And very often, if you're touring somebody for one level, if you're touring for independent, many facilities don't want you to talk about the nursing home part of the campus. Or if you're touring a family for assisted living, many facilities, I remember being told, no, we don't tour the memory care unless that's what they're coming to see. It's like, over there, we have this. And if mom needs that, then we'll go behind that door. So even sometimes as professionals, we're not as comfortable talking about it and we're not as comfortable having those conversations. So I think the professionals are as much on the spot as we in our own families are. So we can't remove the anxiety from this. Not every life event conversation means that there's no anxiety around it. And again, if you think about everything else you have, and going back to that conversation with my daughter's, high school, the college advisor, There was a lot of parts of those conversations that were anxiety provoking, but you have it because you know you have to get through that and you're planning something. Planning any life event may mean some anxiety, but it's important to talk it through. So if you have your advance directive, you want to make sure the person who's the proxy knows that they're the proxy. That's so important. I have people who don't know until mom is in the emergency room and the social worker's whipping out a document saying, well, you're the proxy, this is your decision. That's not the time to find this out. The other thing is, tell your proxy what your healthcare wishes are. Being a proxy really is only saying that you are my voice. I am designating you as the person to be me in the room when I don't have a voice in the room anymore for whatever reason. So you're going to be making decisions not for you, but you're going to be making decisions on my behalf. So talk about what your wishes are. Talk about what your fears are. Talk about what some of your decisions might be. So that person is not just making, is not just having that right because they're the oldest, the firstborn, your favorite child, or whatever they may be, the most responsible one. You will know that they're going to make the decision based on your wishes. So it's important to bring those documents out and say, all right, family, let's talk. And it's very funny. I have, and there's sometimes there are reasons that we don't want to have those conversations. There may be cultural reasons that it's not appropriate to talk about certain topics. In my family, it was like the poo topics. You don't talk about them. If you talk about it, it might happen. So literally there were things and words that you just don't say because that may actually make it happen more. There are generational boundaries. In many families, it's just not something that you talk about with your children because that, almost implies some level of independence. So I think that's important to recognize where your family is with that and how you can be more comfortable with that. I'm not a big believer that just because we reach a certain point, we become the parents and our parents become the children. I don't believe that. I think our parents will always be our parents and we will always be their children, regardless of how old you are. And I think it's very important to be able to maintain those roles, and doing these planning, having this conversation helps to maintain those roles, because then when you are making the decisions, again, you're just the mere voice. You're not all of a sudden the parent. You're just being the voice of your parent. You're helping to advocate for them. Another thing, sometimes the barrier just is this, again, anxiety provoking, taboo, uncomfortable topic that we've never talked about. And so if you're now at the point that, it is a little bit more of a crisis and you haven't had all these conversations and you're not like my family dinners. I mean, again, I'm a little bit the extreme. My kids have grown up with me talking about nursing homes and UTIs and dementia and medication management to the point that they're probably a little bit too comfortable talking about these things. So it literally comes up at almost every dinner time conversation. And I don't expect everyone to be like that. We're an extreme for an extreme reason. But I think the more comfortable you are, it doesn't become this fear. It doesn't become this anxiety provoking topic. I mean, if you think of anytime someone said to you, we need to talk, your skin starts to crawl, and that automatically raises your anxiety regardless of what the topic is. So I think removing that from the conversation, don't make it this we need to talk conversation and let's sit down and have this big 2-hour long, I want you to review all of my documents. The more you can break it up into little pieces, the more you can talk about it in smaller pieces, the more you can normalize it and let someone digest some of the things you're talking about, the better. If you think that you're going to sit down with your family and have a big, 8-hour long, let's review all our legal documents, let's talk about my diagnosis, and let's review my medications, and let's talk about what my doctor said and my prognosis, you're going to lose the conversation. Again, it's not a talk. It's don't make it the talk about it throughout your life. And I think that's the big difference. I think I would love to see a time where we're so much more comfortable talking about this that it really is integrated into every other, major life event, where there's a reality TV show about this, where there's an HGTV of, Flip My Nursing Home Room. And that may not ever happen, that we're that comfortable, but I think the more we normalize this a little bit, the more we feel comfortable talking, the more we can smile through it and be comfortable having these conversations, the better we'll be when it comes into it. So many of my clients, when they get to us, it is crisis point, and that's fine. We answer the phone 24 hours a day. I have plenty of clients that have come to us at crisis point. We have clients that come in the planning point where mom or dad or whoever is years away from needing anything, but they're being proactive and they want to get their ducks in a row and sort of make sure that they have everything in place. And that's a wonderful time to bring us on. And we have also clients that will say something is wrong and we know something is wrong and we need to bring someone in to talk about it. And we come in then also. And we also come in at 2 o'clock in the morning when mom's had another fall and is back in the emergency room and they won't discharge her home because it's not safe. So there's different times to have these conversations, and certainly the best is when you can be more proactive and over 20 years be working these conversations into family gatherings and everything else. But the other part is just finding the right words. I think if we're finding things like, if you don't do this, you'll need to go into a place, that's never going to make that place, that community, sound nice. I think another important thing to recognize is, and I see so many clients saying, I promised mom I would never put her in a nursing home. And one of the important things to recognize is, first of all, the nursing home that mom has in her mind from 40 years ago no longer exists. So let's replace that memory, that image in her mind, with some of the places that there are now, which is completely different from what it was 40 years ago, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago. Senior care has come so far, and it's been so interesting for me to see it even over the 20 plus years that I've been doing this. As assisted livings have evolved, as memory care has now become its own level of care, as home care has taken on a new level, as hospices, people are becoming more comfortable talking about hospice. It's so interesting to see, and what these communities are is very different from the institutions that they were 40 years ago. So I think it's no longer okay just to say, I promised mom this. Let's talk about where that wish came from and what that fear was. And have you talked to mom about ultimately what that fear was about, and what that image was? And let's get through that so that you know what these options are out there, and you can really be more comfortable looking at some communities. Changing some of the verbiage. People use the word facilities, institutions. It's a community. It's a care community. And I think, it may seem like a little thing, and the marketing people probably cheering because they're, saying that this is the proper verbiage. But there's a reason for that also. As we're approaching any difficult conversation that you have in life with family, it's all in how you're packaging it. So if you're putting it in this, if you don't do this, then this will have to happen, then it's going to seem like a punishment. And this is not a punishment. If you say something like, if you're using words that are going to sound harsh, that's not going to sound appealing. So talk about it in a way of, here are communities, here's a gift that you have, these resources, you've done these planning, you have options for your care. I think what people don't realize is that often you actually can have more independence sometimes when you're in a care community, if you're at a certain level of care, than if you're at home. What some people don't realize, that their parent may not want to be cared for by their adult child. That may be not the relationship that they want to have, or maybe their adult child doesn't necessarily want to be in that role. So not every family is cookie cutter. There's nothing that I can say was, here's the plan for everybody. That's why the conversations are so important to have. And what's important to you? What's important to your family? Talk to me about what the generational boundaries are in your family, what the cultural boundaries are in your family. Why is it so harsh for mom to think about moving into a nursing home or needing memory care? What does that mean to you? Be comfortable talking through these conversations so that you know and you can really understand what the need is. The other conversation to have is cost, and really understanding the cost of some of these things. And as much as planning for it, really starting to digest and feel comfortable talking about where some of, in terms of the money aspects of things and what the cost will be, and doing some of the research ahead of time, it's going to put you in a better position. I think, again, going back to, and I always draw so many correlations to life events, because if you think of anything else that you've gone through in life, you've had so much planning, you dream about it, you plan for it, you doodle about it on your notebooks, you think about it, you buy lots of magazines about it, you watch reality TV shows about it or HGTV. You have this image in your mind of what you want, of what you don't want, for everything, right? I mean, you can have, there's a filing cabinet in your mind for every life event that you have long before it happens. And that changes and evolves. And what I wanted to be in second grade was a waitress. That plan for my career path has changed over time for many reasons. But the idea was that we were having those conversations. And there's a reason why teachers start to bring those conversations into the dialogue when kids are really little of what do you want to be when you grow up, is because you want people comfortable talking about that and talking about careers and talking about jobs and understanding that responsibility, so that whenever it is somebody grows up, I'm not sure when that is yet, but whenever it is somebody grows up, it's become something that they know and they feel comfortable with. Again, I know that I'm not expecting second graders to start drawing pictures of what nursing home they want to live in when they grow up, but I think it should be something that we are talking about earlier, to normalize it a little bit and to recognize that aging and that potentially having healthcare related issues longer term and living with things chronically are more of a reality now. So it's important to be comfortable having these conversations and talking to our families about what's important, what you want, what your wishes are. It would be so great to remove the stigma from some of these conversations and some of the words. And that ultimately is one of my goals, is just to remove some of that stigma, to not make it like, oh, that's what you do. I would love to go to a party and tell, well, I love to go to a party. That's the first thing. But I'd love to go to a party and tell people what I do and not get the face of, oh, you work with seniors. Yes, I work with seniors. I love what I do. It's a gift every day to be able to work and learn from the people that I work with. But it's such an uncomfortable conversation for so many people to think about. Then they don't want to hear anymore about what I do. That's really, kind of the message that we wanted to bring to it. And I think partnering along with Laurie about having the documents, it's equally important to be able to have the conversations and have the conversation be part of your planning.
Well, thank you so much. So now we're going to open it up for questions. I do have a few that people have messaged me, as well as somebody who emailed me before the program and desperately wanted to be here but couldn't. And this is actually a question that would be applicable to both Stacey and Laurie. Her situation is she has a very, very stubborn mother and lost her father recently. And her mother refuses to talk about planning or even care or anything. Do you guys have any, words of wisdom or words of advice for her in how to approach somebody who said, I don't want to have the conversation,
So I'll start. I think one of the things is that, again, going back into, if you're seeing it as a we need to talk conversation, that's going to be, nobody wants that. Everybody's going to avoid those conversations. And I think the better way to approach it is not saying we need to have this conversation. And it almost sounds counterproductive, but trying to integrate it into smaller bits of things. So if it's, for example, if it's surrounding a recent diagnosis, talking to somebody in terms of what the doctor may have said, and do they understand that? And let's talk about this in bits and pieces. It could be in the car ride home. And I think, I have 3 teenagers. I've had my most productive and best conversations in little pieces in car rides home. Until then, I like step on that little landmine of a teenager and this conversation ends. But until that point, it's become productive. I have never had a conversation with them where I've said, come into the dining room and sit down at the table. We need to talk. That's not going to be comfortable for anybody. So I think if you can approach it in a way that's not this big conversation, but breaking it up into little chunks and pieces, that's going to be more comfortable and better. And I think sometimes saying, even of let's start with, again, depending on what it is, let's meet someone, let's connect with an elder law attorney and just to make the connection, just to sort of talk about some of these things that we might need. Again, breaking it up into just little chunks, I think is a lot easier, if that helps.
No, that's a really good point, because she was planning to kind of ambush her family member over the weekend. So I'll make sure that
It usually doesn't work. Anytime a client, has called us at like 4 o'clock on Friday, well, I'm seeing mom this weekend and then I'm going to bring the agreement and I'm going to talk about this and we're going to and their goal is to like have this all wrapped up. And by Sunday at 4 o'clock, mom is going to agree to a live-in aid and everything else and a life alert and a wheelchair and blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, all right, I'll talk to her over the weekend, but that's not going to happen.
I'll just comment. So this is something that we deal with all the time. Regardless, even if it's just documents, because documents is only one part of what we do, because it's the documents are like our tool belt, but you have to kind of create a plan. But what I always say is, if the parent doesn't want to broach the topic in terms of where they're coming from, then the way I would turn it around with my clients is I would let them know how they're feeling about the situation, meaning the kids. So what I would say is, don't put the mother and say, you have to do this, you have to think about this. What I would say, and what I advise my clients' children, is to say, Mom, I want to be there for you. I want to help you. And if you're concerned about what's going to happen, if you're not in the driver's seat, and you care about what kind of burdens or what would happen to me, I would love to be a part of this planning and help you do it. Because what happens is, they're only thinking of themselves, that they don't want to focus on it. But if they really do care about their kids, which often is the catalyst, and I always say that my priority is always my senior. The byproduct is what I end up helping their children. But the idea is to say, I would probably broach it as, I understand you don't want to talk about it, but do you care how this is going to impact me and my siblings? That then allows you to tell you how you're feeling, because you can't be in control of the way your parent feels or thinks. But that's kind of how I would do it, is say, Mom and Dad, I'm worried. I'm worried about you. I saw Dad passed away. I know you don't want to deal with it, but I want to know if we can put the ducks in a row, because it will help me help you. And that's kind of one option. So that's a good question we can start with.
Yeah, I mean, it does. We run a caregiver group, and we always say, if at first you don't succeed, you try. Sometimes it takes a lot of patience, but I think Stacey made an excellent point before. You never want to try to wrestle the control away from them, because that's just going to escalate the situation. So it does take certain words, certain ways of
and certain approach. I mean, like Laurie
Yeah.
was, exactly. I think tackling it as we need to talk about you is automatically going to put someone's defenses up. Talking about if it's applicable, what your role is in something or what questions you may have, then I think then changes the direction a little bit.
It's a great point. I like this. This is good. This interactive discussion. I have a couple more questions. If I have long-term care insurance, is that enough with regard for my worries about protecting my assets?
Well, as I said, it's really just a piece of the puzzle. And first of all, what I always tell people is they should take out their long-term care insurance policy. Many people haven't looked at it since the broker sold it to them. And often they don't even remember what they have. So when they're ready to go, and years ago, it wasn't very popular to, for example, to have in-home aid coverage. And now that's where most people want to be. So I really want people to know what they have. So I always recommend that this is the same thing about your documents. And the documents, by the way, when I was talking about them, are your financial power of attorney, your healthcare power of attorney, your living will. If you haven't seen what's in them in a while, they may not fit you. And I analogize it to an outfit that's sitting in your closet. If you have an outfit that's in your closet for 10 years and you haven't put it on, it may not fit. And so along with your documents, having them reviewed, which is something that we do, if you went to go consult with anyone, they should do. The idea is that your long-term care insurance should be looked at. So, because it may not be all of that. So if you want to live home, if you want to have an option of having the care at home and you don't have long-term care insurance coverage, you need to know that, because that will make a difference in the planning that I would be creating for my client. So long-term care insurance is just a piece of the puzzle, but more importantly, know what you have. Many also of our clients will get renewals and they're seeing increases in their premiums. Before you do anything, bring on someone to give you advice. Don't cut back the coverage until someone advises you about it. Also, another strategy is there's now a law in place that long-term care insurance providers have to if you ask, send a second person the premium statement. Have another person on that premium, get that premium statement, whether it's a care manager, care advisor from Generations, if you're using them, or a family member, because if you miss that payment premium, that premium to pay, you could end up having a lapse in coverage, and all what you wanted to do is going to be, out the window. So that's another little piece, helpful advice. So again, it's a piece of the puzzle, but more importantly, know what insurance coverage you have.
Absolutely. And I just want to kind of take on that for a second as well. I think in addition to understanding the policy, understanding what your loved one's healthcare needs are is equally important. I have so many people that will come to us and be like, oh, well, we have a policy and it's a great policy. It's a wonderful policy. And it's fantastic. We've been paying into it for years and it pays a lot. And I'll look at it and I'll say, based on this criteria, services are not going to be covered. Some approach dementia differently than others. Some don't cover it also. I think having somebody not only look at the policy, but also understand what your loved ones or your healthcare needs are is equally important, because, there are people who are expecting to be able to use that policy at a certain point. And because mom needs care, and yet the policy is going to say, we don't cover that type of care, or we don't cover it at this point. And I think especially when it has to do with dementia, that's a tricky one with long-term care insurance policies. So you want to have a professional not only look at the policy, but really understand and help you assess what, that the individual's care needs are at that time, or what they are expected to be based on their diagnosis. And that's sort of part of that planning conversation as well. If it's early enough, there may be something that you can do in terms of purchasing the policy or modifying the policy, or certainly at just in the moment that you're not expecting it to be able to pay something out when it's not going to. So I think that's also important, and care managers can do the assessment part.
That makes sense. So I have another question for Laurie. If I move to another state, are my documents still valid?
So a lot of people ask me that, and I'm licensed in New York and New Jersey, but I have people that say, I'm going to move to North Carolina one day, I'm going to move to Florida one day. And what I always say is, I always recommend that your documents get reviewed by an attorney in that state. My documents, for example, my financial power of attorney has some very broad power, comprehensive language in it. And it does reference New Jersey statutes, especially with banking. But the idea is, I don't know if that particular state has clauses or statute citing that is needed. And so I always say, it may very well be that it will be recognized. Like, I know my healthcare power of attorney is recognized in New York. Now, for example, I'm a New York attorney. So New York, their financial power of attorney is templated. It's a statutory templated document, which I prepare for clients. But the idea, though, is I don't know what other, sort of situations are in other states. So when I'm creating them for you. And it could very well be that when you show it to an attorney, they'll say this works, or we don't have any specific templated language, and so it works. More importantly, the question often gets asked, how long is the power of attorney valid for? And the answer is, the legal answer is that unless it's revoked, it's valid. But tell that to a financial institution that says this is 8 years old, 9 years old. They have their own pushback sort of philosophy. And so I always tell my clients that documents should be updated or at least reviewed, certainly for milestones, like somebody passed away and your spouse is not alive and they were named, and then you don't have an alternate, divorce, or you got married and it was your parents and now you want it to be your spouse. But you also should definitely pull up your documents 6 years, 5, 6 years and see it. I'm not saying you have to redo them in 5 years, but if you haven't used the document and it's been sitting in your safe deposit box for 20 years, one, it's not likely going to be it may not have the players, and the person that you picked may not even be around, but you will definitely probably get pushback from the fact that it's stale in the eyes of the institution. And so that's important to do. And also, as a caveat, I don't believe in keeping your important documents in a safe deposit box in a bank. I tell people, I give a lot of business to Home Depot. I tell go to get Home Depot, get a fireproof box, keep it in above flood waters in New Jersey, because if you have it in a fireproof, a safe deposit box in the bank, when you die, that gets frozen and sealed, and the only person that can get into it is the executor or executrix. But if they can't get appointed because the original is in there, you're going to have a problem. So a lot of people think those documents are valuable. They're not valuable. They're important. So valuables belong in a safe deposit box that somebody can walk off with. Your diamond rings, your jewelry, your coins, your stamp collection, but not your documents. A burglar does not care about your healthcare power of attorney, your financial power of attorney. Okay, so that's really important. And I always tell that because my grandfather used to love to take me to his safe deposit box in Century Village and show me it and take out his contents. That's great, but you don't need that really, for the documents. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Very true.
Does anybody have any other questions? If you were on camera, you can wave at me if you have one. Oh, Lynn, you're the only one on camera. Never mind. Does anybody have anything else? I have one more question to ask, but it looks like,
yeah, they have to mute themselves if they want to ask.
yeah. Does anybody have anything else? You can unmute yourself right now if you do.
Hey, Laura.
Yes.
I know one of the big questions I've come across in home care is that people are not privy or aware of the exclusions that come with the policies. We're finding more and more that will say, well, I've got long-term care, I can cover my nursing shift, or I can cover my home care shift, and then they find out they have a 90-day or 100-day exclusion and they have to pay out of pocket. And I don't, it's just a point of interest, but it's really a mind blower because these people put all their money and paid all these years for these policies and are expecting payment. And guess what? Nada for 100, good 100 days.
Yeah, well, most policies have that period, the elimination period. The
Correct.
philosophy is you're insuring for what you can't afford, and they also are insuring for an ongoing care need, not a short term. And that's why most of them have that. Most of them are 90 days. Sometimes they're
Right.
less, but it's because really, Lynn, they're being triggered because of a long-term care expense, and all of them are different. Some kind of have language where they pay directly to the person's bank account. Some want it to go directly to the provider.
Right.
Some have that you have to have a professional aid, licensed agency. Some it doesn't have to be. It can be a family member. They're all different, Lynn, and that's why people don't really know what they were sold. Which understandable because they probably bought them in their 50s.
They put them back in those little lock boxes and those safe deposit boxes.
They're in their lock boxes.
Is there a limit though? I mean, is there a cap to what they will pay any of the long-term policies?
Well, sure. So every policy, what I always tell clients to do is not only take out the policy, but if you really want to be proactive, I tell my clients to ask for an updated declaration sheet. So
Okay.
you can get what the current numbers are. Because if you bought a daily rate of $100, but you have an inflation rider, which by the way, just means that your daily rate can go up. But also within the inflation rider, you could have complex interest or simple interest, which I'm not going to get you guys crazy.
I know, but I kind of get it. Yeah.
The idea is that $100 could be now $400 a day because you bought it 30 years ago.
Right.
I like my clients to know, especially if they're starting to get into their senior years, what is your daily rate now? That's what I would be asking you if I'm trying to figure out a plan for you, how to piece it together. Because let me just tell you, if you have $100 a day coverage and you had no inflation rider, $100 is not going to cover much today than it was then, because nursing home level care or even assisted living care costs between $6,000 and $14,000 a month.
Right.
So you have to understand that at $100 a day, you're really dealing with a very small amount of coverage. So that's more the important is get an updated declaration sheet, call your policy.
Advice. Yeah. Thank you. It's good because so many of them come in now and we turn it over, we sign the papers, and then they come back as, why aren't they paying? Well, I would tell them to do that, then try to get a declarations page. That's good. Yeah. It's always a surprise.
Well, we're pretty much at 1 o'clock. I know a couple of people just messaged me saying they had other calls. I just wanted to thank everyone who is here, who came here, who's going to be listening to the recording later. Thank you so much for either attending or listening to the recording. We hope to have more of these programs, and if there are certain topics that you'd like to request, please feel free to email me at lhuisking@generations-llc.com. So if you have any topics, anything that you want to know, please email them to me, and we'll try to get a program started for everybody.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks for doing it. It's a good program. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank
guys.
you, Laura. Thank you,
Thank
Stacey.
you, Lynn. Bye, everybody. Thank you.